I used to like Halloween quite a lot actually, until I became a pizza delivery guy. This story actually happened a while back, before people began paying for pizza on the internet. Back then, it was much easier to play that idiotic prank where you order a pizza to a different person's home. I can't believe that stupid people actually think this is a funny thing to do. I mean, the only people it ever really hurts is the pizza delivery place, and they had nothing at all to do with the original conflict. In that vein, people really used to pull out the stops for this prank on Halloween. I was always dreading working that night because so many kids would call in false pizza orders. A couple of times, nearly 1/3 of all the deliveries that night would be jokes. On this particular Halloween, I had really been dreading going to work, but I was a sophomore in college and so I needed the money. The tips were more than ever something I really needed too. Despite my dread of wasted work, however, it turned out to be a relatively prank-free night. I worked from noon until close, which was about 11 p.m. I'd racked up a couple $100 in tips. I was about to get off shift for the night when this last-minute delivery came in. My manager was just about to tell the caller that delivery hours were over and the caller would just have to come in and pick up their pizza themselves. Unfortunately for me, I was in such a good mood at how well the day had gone, I went ahead and agreed to just go and deliver that last pizza. On my way, as typical for a Halloween story I suppose, I noticed that this house was quite off the beaten path, out on a country road. It still was fine though. The ride was creepy enough, but it was fairly enjoyable. I drove my car onto the gravel road. There were many trees on either side, and they appeared to sort of reach over and grab onto the branches, making sort of an arc. The heavy falling of leaves had just begun, and the ground was completely covered in them. It was quite a bit of a ride getting out there, but it was really quite nice scenery. When I did finally notice a house on the way, it was sort of off to the right of the road. Very typical country-style house. A small black mailbox at the end of a small gravel driveway. It seemed to be a 2-story house with a roofed front porch that had a screen door. On the top of the 3 steps that led to the porch was a traditional jack-o'-lantern. You know the kind I mean. The one with triangle eyes, a triangle nose, and the jagged 4 or 5 teeth wrapped up in a smile. I pulled into that driveway. I looked over the mailbox and confirmed that I was indeed at the right place. I hopped out of the car and heard the leaves crunching under my feet as I walked up to the porch. I saw there were only 2 lights around. One was the very dim light coming from what I assumed to be the living room, and the other was simply the jack-o'-lantern. I climbed up the stairs, and I noticed there was no doorbell, nor was there any way to knock on the door behind the screen door. I went ahead and opened it, and walked under the porch. It was extremely dark at this point, and I no longer had the light of the jack-o'-lantern in front of me to show me what was going on. Still though, I made my way over to the door. I rang the doorbell. I waited there for a while, and no one came at first. I buzzed it again and took a few more tries before the door finally opened. Standing by the side of the door somewhat behind it was what I assumed to be an old lady. They were a very tall, thin person who was wrapped in a thick crocheted shawl around their chest, shoulders, and head. I could see very little of this person because it was so dark inside. "Hey, I got your pizza right here," I told her somewhat nervously. "It'll be 11:29 if you please." The lady in the shawl nodded. "Won't you come inside?" she asked me. I really did not want to do so. I hated going into anyone's house for pizza delivery, and I really did not want to go into a house like this. "Oh, it's alright, take as much time as you need, I can wait here," I nervously informed her. "Oh, but my money is in the kitchen, won't you come in please?" I really didn't want to go in there, but I thought if she was going to keep insisting that I do, I would never be able to get out of there. I started to walk into the house when the woman shut the door behind me. The old woman hobbled her way into the kitchen, and I followed nervously behind. It was hard to get a good look inside the house because there was only a single dim lamp lit inside. It had one of those very thick lampshades that blocked out most of the light as well, so the light only shone on the ceiling and floor really. This house was old, and everything in it was old as well. It was like the most stereotypical old grandma house I had ever seen. It was so stereotypical I half expected the woman to have an old wedding cake left over from the wedding where she'd been jilted, and for her to start calling me Pip or something, but I digress. As I continued further, I started to notice the whole place had this kind of musty odor that made me feel very icky and unnerved. The woman walked into the kitchen, but she didn't turn on any lights. I kept a few feet from the kitchen doorway. Sure, I was already inside, but I didn't want to walk into the pitch black with a stranger. She disappeared completely from view. Then after a moment, I saw her shadowy outline appear in a doorway. She beckoned me forward. "Won't you come in?" she whispered. She stood in the doorway and I didn't move an inch. I could barely see any of her due to the shawl and the shadows caused by the darkness. She swayed a bit in the doorway, then repeated her whispering. "Won't you come in?" It was then that I noticed something. A tiny bit of light caught a glint of metal in her hand, right by her shawl. She had what looked to be a kitchen knife in her possession. I panicked a little bit and hoped she didn't notice that I had noticed. It was so dark in the house, though, that it was very unlikely she'd seen my eyes move over. She whispered once more, beckoning. "Won't you come in?" Well, I didn't want the money then. I knew my tips would be more than enough to cover the cost of this pizza. I dropped the pizza on the floor, backed up, and was about to leave. Unfortunately, I stumbled over a hidden bump in the carpet and fell down. In complete panic, I jumped up and started sprinting for the door. I peeked back like an idiot, only to see the lady had not moved. She was still in the doorway. I got the door open and ran out onto the porch. It was then that I heard another voice, this time a man's. "Won't you come in?" I looked over, only to see there, hidden away in the dark, a man sitting on the porch in a rocking chair. He was holding the jack-o'-lantern on his lap. He was looking at me with the creepiest smile. I had no idea how long he had been there, and I really didn't care now. I shoved open the screen door, sprinted to my car, got in, and drove off. I read a lot of these stories where people call the police after and they find out the house was abandoned or something. I didn't call the police, but I did tell my boss about it. He figured it was just a Halloween prank or something. I suppose he may have been right. They seemed a bit old for that, but who knows. That woman could have easily come after me when I'd fallen over like a dumbass, but she decided not to. Either way, I'll never go back there again, and I didn't mind the joke orders after so much anymore. I began babysitting at 13 years old to earn extra money to spend on horribly embarrassing things like Fall Out Boy CDs and the like. I would almost always work for my dad's clients. He was a lawyer, and I'd get referred by word of mouth. I was babysitting for this one family who had a little girl who was 9 years old and a little boy who was 7. The parents seemed pretty okay, if a tad bit crotchety, giving me a full schedule to follow and jokingly threatening to beat any boy who might mysteriously show up after they left. Honestly, it kinda felt a bit cruel for them to tease me about this, given I basically knew I looked like an overgrown baby with frizzy hair at that age. Almost immediately after the parents had left, the little girl started singing in this creepy, high-pitched voice, "We're all alone now." Rightio. Cue the Shining soundtrack. "I know," the little boy chimed in. "Let's play rape." Looking back now, I know the kid probably just heard the term on TV and knew the word was shocking. Said it just for a reaction, I suppose. At the time, though, it really startled me. I got all wide-eyed and tried to change the subject quickly. These kids were absolute hell for the next hour. They got real angry because I wouldn't let them watch South Park on TV. Didn't exactly seem like the thing their parents would allow their precious 7- and 9-year-old to watch in the living room. As soon as I said no, the little girl said casually, "Oh, that's fine, we'll just go play PlayStation in the living room. Feel free to stay by yourself out here." Well, I knew exactly where that was headed. I said they could watch anything else they wanted while I made them dinner. The parents had left instructions to make them sandwiches or something. I could handle that much at least. Before I'd even gotten out the bread though, I heard a massive crash. It seemed the little girl had broken a glass, whether in anger or on accident, I didn't really know. I was pissed and tutting along, but ultimately there was no way to punish her for something I hadn't actually seen. I cleaned it up while these two watched me with these weird eyes. Dumping the broken glass in the trash, I went back to making the food. I'm a vegetarian myself, so all the kids had chicken for theirs. I made a simple salad one for myself. Just as I was finishing up, the little boy screamed out in what sounded like a pantomime of pain. Nonetheless, I ran over to the couch in the living room to check on him. "My ankle!" he howled, dramatically flopping back onto the couch. While I tried to figure out just how he'd hurt his ankle, the little girl quietly slipped out of the room. I was aware of her walking around, but I didn't really pay it much mind. Instead, I was focused on this little boy, pretending to be in pain. He just kept on repeating, "I went to stand, but it hurt so much, I don't know what happened," over and over. I saw his eye suddenly flick to just behind me, where I could see the little girl now standing, with a very disturbing smile on her face. He was miraculously healed now. Yeah, praise the Lord, I suppose. At this point, I was simply thinking these kids were a bit weird. Maybe they craved attention a little too much and needed some more parental involvement. I was only 13. That wasn't my job. It was only $60 and 4 hours away. I set out the sandwiches for the two of them to eat at the dining table. I went to get us some soda and returned to have my own meal. After pouring soda for the both of them, I realized they hadn't eaten anything yet. I asked them what they were waiting for. They both gave me this very unnerving smile and said, "For you to take a bite of yours." I'm so glad I had a gut feeling to open the top part of my bread for my sandwich. When I did, I saw a shard of glass, broken glass, the same glass that I just put in the trash from that girl's tantrum. I stared in horror at these two little kids staring at me with menacing grins. I lost it. Are you serious? At the very least, you could have really injured my mouth. What's wrong with you two? Instead of crying or apologizing or pretending to be ashamed or confused, these two little fuckers began to laugh, and not like a little kid laugh either. It was really low and kind of menacing, not a free laugh that kids would do. It was like they were threatening me. I'll never forget it. My immediate reaction was, these kids are way too young to be acting like this. I called my older sister and told her what happened. She came over and took over for me. We left the house with chills after the parents arrived, and I never babysat for those two ever again. What I just can't get past is the level of premeditation that went into sprinkling that broken glass into my sandwich, and the totally remorseless way they responded to me getting upset. All I can say is they were totally unlike any two kids I've ever met before. This happened a few days ago, and I'm still pretty shaken up about it. On Friday afternoon, I got a call from my friend named Sarah, asking if I wanted to meet her and another friend named Lisa at Dunkin' Donuts, as we hadn't seen each other in quite a while. The Dunkin' Donuts was a 15-minute walk away from my house, so I decided I would walk there instead of driving. Besides, the weather was very nice that day. I got there and found where Sarah and Lisa were sat, so I went to join them. As we were chatting and having fun, I noticed my sister Elena was sat at a table in the corner of the room with her friend Jess. I excused myself from the table and went over to them. My sister and her friend are both 18 years old for reference. My sister still lives with my parents, whereas I live alone. They were sat at a table with 3 seats, so I went to sit down and catch up with both of them. They both jumped up a little bit, but then looked more relieved than anything to see me. Immediately, Elena whispered to me, "Don't look now, but the guy in the blue shirt over there, I think he's following Jess and I." I glanced over and saw a middle-aged man sat at a table facing away from us. He's passed our table a good 5 times in the past 20 minutes to go to the bathroom, but he always walks slower whenever he passes us by, she continued. I told them they were most likely just being paranoid. Surely there was nothing to worry about. For their peace of mind though, I offered to leave with them so they wouldn't feel as worried. I walked back over to my table and explained the situation to Sarah and Lisa. Both of them laughed it off and assumed my sister to be paranoid. Literally only a minute later though, I saw the man get up from his seat and start walking towards the bathroom. My eyes followed him, and sure enough, he walked extremely slowly past Elena and Jess. In fact, it was almost comical how obvious he was. Both of them looked in my direction, and I nodded to show them that I had seen what he was doing. About 5 minutes later, I went into the toilets myself. On my way, I passed by them and whispered to them I was ready to leave whenever they were. They both agreed they were ready to go right now. I was just going to go to the bathroom real quick, and we could leave right after I'd done my business. Elena had come in her own car, so she was going to give me a lift back as well. I went into the toilet stall, did my business, washed my hands. I was walking down the corridor back into the main eating area when both of them rushed to me. I asked them what was wrong, and they explained another man had joined that strange creeper, and both of them had been pointing and staring at them. They rightfully felt unsafe. We walked back to the eating area. I put my money on our table and explained to Lisa and Sarah that I was taking off. I would explain what was going on when I got home. We all piled into Elena's car and left that creep's car in the rear view mirror. After a 2-minute drive, we reached my house. Just then, I remembered I had been meaning to return something I had borrowed from my mother, so I asked her to drive me with them, since they were going there anyway. I jumped out of the car to get what I needed when my phone rang. It was Elena. She explained that car from those 2 men had driven past and pulled into a random driveway. The driver of the vehicle was for sure the creep from Dunkin' Donuts. I looked out my window. Sure enough, there was a car there which didn't belong to the owner of that house, parked right in their driveway. I ushered the girls into my own home and locked the door tight. I instructed Elena to take a photo of the car and its license plate, and I told Jess to call 911, as she gave the operator more information about the man than I could. Elena took the photos, and we sort of gathered around Jess as she was speaking to the operator. She had just finished telling the story. I heard the operator assure us the police would be at my house soon. A few minutes passed by, and there was a loud knock at the front door, followed by a voice shouting through it, "It's the police! Open up!" We all did a sigh of relief as I went to go open the door. Jess told the operator it seemed they had arrived, and then she hung up. I was just about to unlock it when I had the thought to look through the peephole at the top of the door first. I peered through, only to see there was no police officer. It was that same guy. I froze in fear. I didn't know what to say. "We didn't call the police!" I managed to shout back to the man through the door. Elena and Jess were both confused as to why I just said this. "We had a call, sir," the man shouted back. "You have the wrong address. Go away!" I yelled. I informed the girls it was that same creep at the door, not an officer. They were both extremely scared now, as was I. I was about to tell Jess to call the police again, until I heard the sirens coming around the corner. "Sir, you have to let me in right now!" the man shouted. I didn't answer this time. He was pounding desperately on the door, commanding for me to let him in. Eventually, it turned into begging and pleading. I heard the car pull up and some commotion outside. An actual police officer then knocked on the door. I let him in after checking the peephole first. The officers took the man into custody, while another officer took Elena and Jess into the dining room for some brief questioning. I called my parents and Jess called hers as well. Both were here extremely quickly once we told them everything that happened. The man was found with a kitchen knife on his person and some other weapons in his car as well. Who knows what could have happened if I hadn't looked through the peephole first. I'm a female, and when I was 16, I hung out mostly with a group of small friends. Toby was the gay one, John was a small guy who posed at being real macho, and there was a foreign exchange student from Spain named Maria. At the time, both John and I had a bit of a crush on Maria, since she was bisexual. This meant we both attempted to impress her any time an opportunity arose. This leads directly into the story. One night in October, we were all hanging out at Toby's house, smoking some weed like the fly little shits we were. Maria said that she wished she could do something scary since Halloween was close by. It was also her first time in the States as well. Me, being the absolute coward that I am, loved the idea of doing scary things like ghost hunts and stuff, but actually doing them was a different thing entirely. Still though, I wanted to impress her with my bravery, or I suppose my stupidity, however you choose to look at it. I suggested going to this place called Spider Gates. It's an old cemetery in Leicester, Massachusetts that's a bit of a hike into the woods, and super old as well. It's also supposed to be really haunted. We drove the half hour in my dad's beat-up Pathfinder down into the middle of nowhere until we came to the path that led deeper into the woods where this cemetery was. I parked right across the street from it. The car wouldn't even lock because it was so old and beat up, so we had to just leave it there and take the keys with us. We smoked a bowl or two on our way to the cemetery. Once we got there, we were stoned out of our minds. We walked around for a little while, and while the ambience was quite creepy, nothing really happened. We did hear some rustling occasionally and some stuff that was probably just animals or the wind blowing through the trees and making eerie howling sounds, but it was nothing out of the ordinary for such a place. We went to the part of the cemetery where the ground was raised up a bit, like you were standing on a small stage. There were trees surrounding it basically in a circle, and we smoked another bowl there together. We had been there for what must have been 20 minutes or so, just talking, smoking, and laughing about dumb stuff, when we heard these loud, heavy crunches through the leaves and twigs, coming from deeper into the woods, the opposite direction we had come from. It didn't sound like an animal either. We all quieted down and looked over, but it stopped as we did so. We shrugged it off quick. Looking back, this was stupid even if it wasn't a person. The area we live in had some bears, so it could have been quite bad still. We went back to smoking. John and I attempted to pathetically flirt with Maria, while Toby flirted with John, and it was generally just a good vibe. Maria stopped though, and told us to look into the woods suddenly. Right where she was pointing, about 50 to 100 yards away, there was a light. Basically, it looked like someone was holding a flashlight pointed right at us. They were so far away though that it didn't seem the beam was reaching us. A few seconds later though, it went out, and we could hear this really weird high-pitched hyena-like laughing. I'm talking some real crazed, maniacal clown laughing. What the fuck was that? We were miles away from any houses. Before anybody had the chance to say anything else, another light flashed on, this time closer, 50 or so yards to the left of the first one. We could hear sprinting through the woods from the direction of the first light when the second went out with the same creepy laughter. We communally decided to get the hell out of there and started pretty hastily back down the trail. It was an extremely dark night. The clouds were heavy set in front of the moon, so seeing anything besides what our cell phones illuminated in the night was basically impossible. A couple minutes down the path, we started to calm down a bit and discuss what was going on. After a few seconds of calm though, the heavy footsteps started up behind us in the leaves. We stopped and turned. About 50 feet behind us, only barely visible in the darkness, was the outline of something in the middle of the path. Honestly, I probably would have shit myself if I hadn't been so high. John, being the brave macho guy, stepped out in front and yelled at whatever it was to leave us alone. A light switched on, I'm assuming in the person's hand, and they didn't move. They just stood there holding the light and shining it down on us. John yelled at the person for another 30 seconds or so before they turned off the light and just started to walk away. All the while, that same crazy laughing started coming from far in the woods. We quickly made our way out of there and went back to the car. We got ready to drive as far away as we could, but when we turned the key, nothing. Not even a slow turnover. Nothing at all. John liked to think he knew something about cars, so we all got out while he looked under the hood. The 2 cables that connected the battery were hanging free, and the screws that attached them around the posts or terminals were missing. He didn't know if we could reconnect them without the screws, and honestly, I had no idea either. We decided to try and call for help, only to find there was now no cell service. What the hell were we supposed to do now? We were in the middle of the woods with a dead car and no way to contact anybody. Those creeps surely weren't far behind because we could still hear them laughing like hyenas, playing a manhunt in the forest. Lucky for us, only a minute or so after, a car came down the road and seeing our hood up, pulled to the side to see if we needed help. I was really happy to see it was 2 older women and not some maniacal laughing freak that was also in on it. We gladly accepted the ride from them to the nearest place with cell service and called my parents to come pick us up. Needless to say, they were sort of upset with us for going to the cemetery in the first place, since it was technically trespassing. Also, for abandoning the car there. Overall, they were just glad we were fine after getting in the car with strangers, however nice and innocent they seemed to be. The next day, my dad, Toby, and I went back to get the car. Weirdly, this time we both had cell service. I'm not sure what was going on out there. I'm just glad those 2 old women came by and offered a ride when they did. I'm not exactly sure if they were just having some twisted version of fun or if they were out to do some actual harm, but I'm glad we didn't have to find out that night. Hey guys, before this first story gets started, I wanted to go ahead and let you know that there is some animal cruelty and animal death in this first story. So if you're not comfortable with that sort of thing, you can go ahead and take a look in the comments or the description below, and there will be a timestamp for you to skip ahead to the second story. So go ahead and do that if you're not comfortable with that sort of thing. Thanks for the understanding. When I was 16, I got my first job at a local fast food restaurant. Of course, since I was in school during the day, I had to work a second shift job. I was hoping that by working, I would be able to save up some money to buy my own car. Until then, however, I had to walk home to the restaurant when I got off work. It really wasn't that bad, since the restaurant was in the town I lived in anyway. The walk was maybe a little over half an hour or so. The only bad thing about it really was that I had to walk past this lightly wooded area that always gave me the creeps. It was pretty dark as well and not fenced off, which made it even freakier to me. Both of my parents worked early in the morning, and even if they didn't, they likely wouldn't have come to pick me up anyway, since it was such a short walk. One Friday night in the middle of summer, I had just gotten out of work. It was around midnight, since the store had closed at 11 p.m. I got everything cleaned up and began my walk home. It was a really nice night out actually, as I was walking along the town street. The sky was extremely clear, and I found myself constantly looking up at the constellations. They were particularly bright tonight. I was looking forward to arriving home and taking a long shower, then maybe playing some video games before going to bed. I did begin to get a little apprehensive though, as I walked by that wooded area. It was right by a road that led away from the main town road and off to a housing area that I lived in. It wasn't even that far to go really. It bugged me though because there were no street lamps at all in that area. It got very dark very quickly, and I wouldn't get light again until I turned onto the next street where the houses were. I made the turn onto that dark wooded street and tried my best to pace myself as I walked along. Hurrying surely wasn't going to help me. For some reason, I found I always got a lot more frightened whenever I tried to run or hurry. Not sure why. I guess if someone saw me running, I would have been quite humiliated. 16-year-olds really shouldn't be so scared that they try to run down the street though. That's what I told myself. It wasn't like anyone would have seen me anyway being so late at night, but for some reason right now, I still felt like I was being watched. "Hey, kid!" I heard a voice off to the side of me call out. I nearly jumped out of my skin. It took everything I had in me not to just take off running down the road. Turning around though, I looked and didn't see anyone there at all. All I could see was a bunch of wooded area and trees. As I was trying to look a bit closer, a man suddenly stepped out from behind one of them. I kid you not, he was dressed exactly like a ringmaster from a circus. He was wearing a black top hat and a red jacket with white pants on. He was very neat for having just been in the woods, and he had this big smile plastered across his face. Hey there," I responded. I shuffled on my feet, not really knowing what to do. "Come over here, kid," the man called to me. "I want to show you something." I didn't really want to go anywhere near this guy. He didn't make any moves toward me, but he was really creepy. Sorry, I best be on my way home now," I told him, and started to walk a little quicker down the street. "Come on, kid, it'll only take a second. I want to show you something real cool." Now, I know that everyone reading this will just think it would have been stupid for me to not keep walking, but I'd never really been good at conflict, and I didn't know how to feel in awkward situations either. I motioned again I was just gonna walk home. Once again, the man gestured for me to come to him and indicated he really wanted to show me something. Against my better judgment, I found myself turning over towards the man. I figured if I just waited there, I could tell what he was up to without getting too close to him. He noticed that I had walked slightly towards him, and his already wide grin grew even wider. I didn't plan on going any further than this though, just close enough to see what it was he was supposedly trying to show me. I wanted to stay as far away as possible. I stopped a fair bit of the way across the street from the guy. "Come on, kid, come closer. I need to show you something." "I think you can show me from where I'm standing," I told him. I was being foolhardy, I admit, but I could still draw the line between foolhardy and completely dumb. The man looked very disappointed, but his smile only faltered a little bit. It didn't fade completely. "Alright, well, I suppose that's close enough. I'll go get it." The man walked back behind the tree line and was out of sight for a moment. I thought about just leaving while he was back there, but I just stood there, afraid to move. The man was only gone for a moment, but when he came back from behind the tree, he had something vile in his hand. It looked like he had sewn the top half of a dead chihuahua onto the bottom half of a fish, and he didn't do a good job at it either. It was covered in dried blood, and one of the dog's eyes was hanging out of its socket. The man smiled at me. "I found a Fiji mermaid." I took off and ran my butt off. I didn't stop until I got home. Rather than save it for a car, I used my money to buy a bicycle so I could ride home instead.